Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of HardHat Uncovered. We're coming to you from the studios of HardHat Uncovered in Alexandria, Virginia. Welcome back, Lieutenant Oates.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
Welcome back, Mr. Hipple.
How's it going, guys? Good to see you.
And I'm going to throw this out there again, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, we are waiting for some names for Mr. Hipple. So we might do something. If we can come up with a good name, we might have a giveaway for somebody.
Oh, there we go. Give out a T-shirt.
Give out a T-shirt or a stress toy or something. We'll figure it out.
Everybody likes free stuff.
Right.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about silica, and I know that's a pretty big topic. That's one of the big changes that OSHA rolled out here pretty recent. So we're going to be tackling the topic of silica today. And if it gets a little long, I don't want to cut this short. So if it gets a little long, this might be a 2-part series. So
yeah, there's a lot to talk about with silica, and there's a lot of things that employees and employers don't understand. So we're going to cover a lot of stuff today.
Yep. All right. So when it comes to silica, there's so many standards out there. There's the 1910, 1053 for general, in the maritime. There's 1926, 1153 when it comes to construction. And then when it comes to the ISOs, there's so many out there. If you're talking about painting and varnishing, that comes under the ISO 3262. There's the ISO 24095, ISO 16258, ISO ABCDEFG, LMNOP.
All these numbers and letters, man.
So I guess just depends on wherever you're listening to or whatever industry you're in. Just make sure you're following whatever applies to you.
Yeah. And this is a good topic to talk about because there's a lot of people that don't understand, first of all, what silica even is, why it's harmful, why have we changed the standards, and then people that do understand, how do I protect myself? People are starting to figure out that this silica is harmful, and they want to learn how they can better protect themselves. So we're going to go over all that kind of stuff today. We're going to talk about the standards, the new rules, and how to protect yourself.
Yeah, where it's commonly found, too. That's a big thing.
Where's that, named?
A lot of places.
Yeah.
A lot of concrete, a lot of brick.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, just in the, let's just say we're just talking about the construction industry alone. I mean, you're talking about, recorded cases of over, 2 million construction workers that have been exposed to silica, throughout, just thousands and thousands of workplaces that are out there. But not even that, just imagine the amount of exposure. I mean, that number's a lot higher.
OSHA put out a number that they're estimating close to 1 million people are exposed to silica at or above the exposure limit. So, that's a big number to say that many construction workers or that many workers are exposed to silica.
And actually, as we're talking about OSHA, because I actually was talking to someone the other day about one of our podcasts who's very new to the safety industry. So if you are new to the industry, because the common word that we talk about is OSHA. OSHA stands for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. So that's probably the most common organization that we talk about in our podcast. But in case you're wondering, who is OSHA, or if you've seen our little ladder safety video that we put out, we talk about OSHA in there as well. So
antsy, you're making me antsy.
All right, so if you haven't seen that, go to YouTube and look at it's about 1.5 minutes long, just a little video we threw out there on ladder safety. So, all right, so we're talking about silica. We've just mentioned how it affects people on the work site. We've talked about that it's everywhere because it is a natural occurring substance that is out there. But what is silica really?
So it's a common mineral. That quartz is actually what it is. So I always try to explain it as kind of very similar to sand. There's silica and sand, quartz. It's in a lot of your construction products. So you'll find it in anything that's made out of concrete, asphalt, brick, block, mortar, all those, are you noticing a pattern here? All these similar types of materials, they all contain silica.
Yep. So if you ever see, I don't know, let's just say a building is being demolished, they're taking down a building, and as the crane or whatever piece of equipment is tearing this building down, all that dust you start to see flying off, that is a broken down form of silica. Because again, like Dylan said, silica is in sand. When I go to the beach, I'm surrounded by silica, but it's a lot heavier and a bigger form of it. So it's not airborne.
So basically what happens is it's fine until it becomes airborne, and you make it airborne by breaking it down. So all the types of things we do in construction with demolition, saw cutting, chipping, hammering, we're creating this airborne respirable silica so we can now breathe it in. And the issue with it is once it gets into your lungs, it stays there. It clings to the lining of your lungs, and it creates scar tissue, and over time it causes different cancers, and it causes you to not be able to breathe as efficiently as you should be able to.
Yeah, and so if you think about it, so when your lungs that you're talking about, they're made to be pretty flimsy, pretty flexible, and then once they start getting cancerous cells in there because of silicosis or something like that, because of silica, what happens is the lung is no longer flexible, and it even gets to the point where the scarring will start making the lungs actually stick to the walls of itself. But unlike, let's just say if I don't know, let's just say if I was a heavy smoker for a year and I was exposed to the cancerous effects of cigarettes, but I quit, well, I still have a good chance of not having long-term effects of cancer from smoking. The deal is with silica, once it turns into scar tissue,
it's there forever.
It's there forever, and it just continues growing.
Right.
It's like rust in your lungs.
And one of the big things with silica exposure, silicosis, is it's a long-term chronic type of disease or illness. So you don't notice the effects overnight. I'm not going to go cut a block on site today, breathe in all that dust, and notice the effects tomorrow. It's going to be doing that repetitively for the next 10 years of my life, and all of a sudden I now have silicosis.
Yeah. And so when Dylan had mentioned that it was respirable, what I want to hit on is that so if you're a parent, don't listen to this podcast and say, well, I'm never going to take my kids to the beach again because there's silica in the sand. Again, we're talking about a form of it that's very broken down, and I think they said when it's respirable is when it's one micron, I think is the actual number. And so I looked it up in a comparison, and so when you compare it to a strand of hair is supposed to be around 100 micron, how thick it is. So it's a pretty small amount, but again, if you're a parent, don't freak out and don't say, okay, I got to move out of this brick home because there's silica all around me. Yeah. We're talking about as it gets disturbed and as it gets broken up. So
right, and we're talking about some of the most common types of places you're going to see this are in type construction, in road construction, building construction, highway construction, and then there's certain trades that see this a lot more than others. Before we got on air, Damon, you were talking about your one friend who actually has silicosis. So why don't you tell everybody what his occupation was?
He was a brick mason.
Right.
And he had been doing it for 25, 30 years. And so back when they first started, it was just get the work done, cut the brick, mix the concrete, keep it moving, and then when you get older and when technology comes out that can detect it, and you know what I mean? So that's how he found out.
Right.
Yeah, and at that point it's too late. Yeah. There's no reversal.
I hate to say too late, but
yep.
You're in a bad situation then.
Yep. Yep. I don't know. Maybe when we get to that point when we can start replacing our lungs, have some robot AI technology replace our lungs.
No, you can. You can do lung transplants.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Just throw some brown paper bags at me.
I'll be good to go.
Okay, so with all that being said, this is why we needed these new standards to come out.
Yeah, I mean, just like with any standard, the overall goal is to protect workers. We're trying to protect them from developing these types of diseases. So just for a little background, the permissible exposure limit that was in place was over 40 years old. So that's a long time to not.
Before you were born.
Yeah, almost twice. You got to throw them young jokes in every time.
I got to. That's all right. Hey, look, I'll be here in a couple months, man. I'll be hitting 40. So it was actually before I was born, too.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yep.
But it was because it was based off of old research. These numbers didn't reflect the types of dangers that workers were exposed to with silica. We've learned since then that the permissible exposure limit we were allowing these employees to work in, to breathe in, was actually causing silicosis or other lung diseases like Damon's buddy has from being a brick mason. They didn't understand that this was an issue because they hadn't done the research to figure it out, because it's a chronic type of illness, not an acute illness.
Yeah, but also, and this is, we talk about the common thing of silicosis and how it affects your lungs, but it can actually get down to, giving you kidney problems.
Yeah.
Into your autoimmune system. So, I don't want to. I mean, the biggest thing, of course, is the lungs.
But it's not limited to the lungs.
But it's not limited
Right.
to the lungs at all. So,
yeah, any part of your respiratory system can be affected.
yeah.
And then just something I found interesting when I first started looking into silica was over 80 years ago, the Secretary of Labor, her name was Frances Perkins, she actually brought up the issue of silica. So it's been a known issue for over 80 years, and we're just now in 2019 really starting to hit home and protect workers. So we have an 80-year gap where we could have been saving lives.
Yep. So that was right before when Lieutenant Oates was born.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that why your beard's so gray?
It's actually white out.
Oh, okay. White out. Tiger stripes or zebra stripes.
Okay, so we've talked about what is silica, why did we need the new standards. So what is the new standard? What is the new rule that's been issued out there?
So the major change to the new silica rule was the permissible exposure limit. So for construction, the permissible exposure limit, the PEL, used to be 250 micrograms per cubic meter. It is now changed to 50 micrograms per cubic meter, so 5 times less than what it was set at. And actually, they have an action level set at 25 micrograms per cubic meter. And then general industry, as we were discussing, that they used to have a permissible exposure limit, PEL, of 100 micrograms, and they cut theirs in half to 50. So all industries now are set at 50 micrograms per cubic meter.
Yeah, and so and I guess just to explain it a little bit, when it came to the general industry, why that was lower to start off with is because in the general industry, let's just say a company that's making bricks or something like that. So typically those jobs are going to last, the lifetime of that company,
Right.
however long that is,
Right.
whether it's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years or something like that. And where construction sites, typically they're
Every 6 months,
a
year, 2
long-term
years.
project, is a year or something like that.
Yeah.
I guess you would say a lifetime construction project would really only be like 3 years or something
Right.
like that. So the general industry was lower for that reason, the fact that there was a longer exposure rate, the possibility for those employees.
Yeah, and if you really think about it, general industry, most of it takes place indoors. So if you're, in a manufacturing of bricks, you're inside, you can see that dust cloud trapped inside. So, I mean, it was probably more apparent to them that it was an issue.
Yep, and actually that'll be a good segue. So on our next podcast, it's actually indoor air quality. So
Yeah,
we'll be talking about something like that.
I did that on purpose, yeah.
Nice segue. So, we talked about the construction level PEL, the general industry and maritime PEL, what the action level is. But actually, and there's another one which really comes to any standard that's out there, is that an employer, your organization can choose to go over and beyond what the limits are. So you could always set your limit to lower. You might say, hey, our action limit is at 10,
Yeah.
or something like that. So
We're going to start protecting our workers at this limit
Right.
and go above and beyond.
So, and I always get tongue-tied. As many times I've said this, So the micrograms per cubic meter, I said it.
Nice job. Hey, round of applause. Round of applause.
I had to, do the syllables with my finger there. So the micrograms per cubic meter, that could be a hard understanding, without really having to break it down or something like that. So, but we did a little bit of research, and so we looked at just some of these examples. So if you were cutting up, let's say tile, and and you're in a room that's 10 square feet. Okay, so if you're in a room that's 10 square feet, so 10 by 10 and then 10 foot tall, so actually
10 by 10 by 10.
Yeah, 10 by 10 by 10, and you're tile cutting. Your exposure rate is at 34. Micrograms per cubic meter. So if you're cutting up the CMUs or concrete masonry units, or the cinder blocks, which is the common term for that, that's typically around 29 at an 8-hour period. So paver stones are at 27. So I just wanted to throw some of that out there because that terminology, if you're not an industrial hygienist or a math whiz, those numbers can get a little confusing. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an understanding. And actually, that was my safety nerd moment.
Yeah,
right there.
Nerd alert. Yeah, to make it simple, if you can see a cloud of dust coming from one of those types of operations, you're probably at or above the action level. So that's just a good rule of thumb.
Yep. So we were just talking about that third option. We talked about construction general industry, and then that an employer could go above and beyond. But let's get into what are the actual employee requirements with this new rule?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that the actual employers have to do to protect their workers. And one of them is they have to establish a written exposure control plan that basically is going to identify the task that is causing silica exposure and explain what your method of protecting your workers is. And then, is it restricting access to that area? Is it we're making them wear respirators? We're making them wear APF10 dust mask? Whatever it is, they have to have it in writing. Another thing is they have to have a competent person in silica. So just with anything else in construction or general industry, we have to have these competent people that actually know when there's a hazard and know when there's exposure and know what to do about it. So it's important that we train our employees and have a designated competent person on site to be able to identify these types of situations.
So Lieutenant Oates, I got a question. Mm-hmm. If I have my OSHA 10, right? I sat through 10 hours of that rigorous OSHA training.
You're an expert.
Does that make me the competent person that can implement this exposure control plan?
No, it doesn't. I don't think so.
Yeah. Now, maybe, so I'm gonna play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Maybe in the 10-hour course, maybe my employer threw in that training as part of the 10-hour.
Right. But as we know, a competent person is you are knowledgeable enough to be able to identify those hazards. So does sitting in a 10-hour OSHA class or make you knowledgeable enough in silica to be able to identify the hazards?
Identify the hazard and make the changes.
Right. So
and that's exactly make the changes.
Right.
That's the important part.
Yeah, have the authority to do that. And the reason I threw that out there is because a couple of weeks ago we ran into a situation, and I was told where this task required somebody who was competent on a piece of equipment. Their supervisor said, well, they're competent. They have their OSHA 10. And so I tried to say, I wanted to, say, well, I got my OSHA 500. Can I jump on your equipment? And I didn't. I wanted to, just to drive the point home. But
I would have said that.
Hey, let me jump up in that excavator, man. I got my OSHA 500.
Yeah, let me operate that crane for you. All right, so Dylan, so what's some of the restrictions now? One of the key restrictions I would say when it comes to job sites.
Yeah, so housekeeping practices. So think about it. You're sweeping the floor at a site. What do you see? A giant dust cloud, right? So there's so many different restrictions in housekeeping now so that we're not exposing everybody in the room to that dust cloud, that silica cloud. Some of the things we can do, sweeping compound, that's a common one, probably because it's the most cost-effective way. But there's also other methods. You can use a wet method You can
Wet vac.
wet vac. You can spray the floor down with a pressure washer. You can use a wet vacuum. You can use a HEPA vacuum if you buy industrial HEPA vacuums. Now you're gonna have to help me. High efficiency particulate. What's the A? I can't remember.
Okay, so HEPA, high efficiency particulate air.
There we go.
Okay.
Nailed it. HEPA, a HEPA filter on a vacuum is high efficiency for particulates, meaning that it collects the majority of the particulates. So you can't just use a normal vacuum. You have to use a HEPA vacuum.
But actually, so when we're talking about the HEPA vac, there is still a requirement when it comes to that, because the HEPA vac, it's going to take out. I think at least it has to take out 99.97.
Yeah, something really high.
So, but you got to think in that 0.03 that can still get through. That will still allow. I think this is what earlier what I was saying, the 3 microns. That's where I was getting that number from. Is that 3 microns can still get through, which is still something that that you can breathe in. Also, the other requirements when it comes to the HEPA vac is that it has to be a vac that you can either do a reverse flow, because if the filter gets clogged up, you got to be able to hit a switch to unclog the filter, or it's got to consistently be replaced, the filter, or it's got to be able to manually unclog the filter. So
so if you've ever been on a site and you're listening to these things run, the ones I've been around at least, they have a giant pulsator. It's knocking, you hear it thumping because it's knocking all the particulates off of the filter. Issues we run into is when it comes to emptying these HEPA vacuums. So you did your due diligence, you did a great job by using a HEPA vacuum. We didn't expose anybody. But then you take that bag of dust and silica and you dump it into a dumpster and it blows up right in your face. You kind of just defeated the purpose, right? So coming up with the right strategy to empty them is a big deal. Don't just dump it. Maybe we can pull out the bag, tie it shut, and then throw it away. So there's different options, but just know that that's something that I've personally seen that has been an issue, and it may be an issue on your site as well.
So we got through the housekeeping part of it, and I think when it comes to the housekeeping, that is one of the biggest common exposures I see, because you don't even have to be in the trade of masonry or anything like that. You could it could be that affects. You could be a pipe fitter and maybe have to sweep up your area, and now you're exposed, or your apprentice. Your helper is sweeping up the area. Now your helper is exposed to it. So that's a common one that will go in any industry across, any trade.
Yeah, and that's the big
craft.
thing. Silica doesn't just affect the masons and the concrete workers and, those types of trades. Like Junior just said, it affects every single trade.
Absolutely.
Because at some point.
Because you're around it.
Because you're around it, exactly.
I mean, even think about in office buildings.
Yeah.
In some scenarios, maybe there's some work that was done or something like that, and now you have an organization that comes in at night to clean your office building, and so now they're coming in and they're sweeping up the floors,
and they don't know.
They don't even know about it. Now the dust is all flying around. So that's just something that can affect any organization out there, any craft, any individual. So
So right now we're talking about employer requirements. So this is what the employer has to do to protect the employee. Another thing that the employer is required to do is offer medical exams, and that has to include chest x-rays and lung function tests, and they have to provide this opportunity to workers every 3 years, but it's only required if that employee wears a respirator for more than 30 days out of a year. So, but like we were talking about before, Junior, why don't you explain the 30-day trigger?
Yeah, so we don't want to get confused, because we talk about a 1 year, a calendar year, or we talk about fiscal year or something like that. So your fiscal year might be from October to October, or obviously the calendar year is from January 1st to December 31st. So what we don't want to get confused is by saying, okay, well, my employee only worked in this exposure for 15 days in 2018. So, he's good to go. And now his 30 days starts all over in January 1st.
Not the case.
Yeah, it's not the case. So what we have is what it's called the 30-day trigger. And so a 30-day trigger means, let's just say the exposure started on June 1st. So from June 1st of 2018 to June 1st of 2019. So it's going to be in that year of when the trigger day started. So like I said, in this example, it would have been June 1st, 2018 to June of 2019.
Yeah, and remember, this is for workers. So workers that wear respirators 30 or more days a year, they're the ones that you have to have these medical exams done.
Yeah, and so when it comes to that as well, something that you got to think about is that we're talking about wearing respirators. So, and we'll probably talk about this again a little bit further down. But if they're going to be wearing a respirator, just make sure that you still follow the same program, your respirator program, that they got to get fit tested and all of that stuff. So I think we're going to talk about that again, so I'm not going to dive too much into it. I just wanted to throw that in since we are talking about respirators. But, the biggest thing is that as an employer, you got to train your workers.
Right.
They got to know, just like in any situation, any hazard that's out there within your organization, the worker has to be trained. Your employee has to know, what is the operation, what is the silica exposure that I have, how do I limit, the exposure so I'm not breathing this stuff in, all of that good stuff. Just the same way with any other hazard that's out there.
Yeah. So something we've done on our construction sites in the past is all of our foremen and superintendents went through competent person training for Silica. So all the foremen and even lead men and superintendents are competent in Silica. And then the rest of the craft had a Silica awareness training to learn about the hazards of it. So that's just something we've done in the past that seemed to be pretty effective. By making that many competent persons, you're allowing them to understand what silica is and have the ability to eliminate the exposure out in the field, because they're the ones that are ultimately going to be seeing it the most and being able to do something about it.
Right, and especially if they've come up through a trade or a craft or whatever, and they've never had that brought to them in the first place.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's kind of hard to ask a question about something you don't really know about.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like if you're a brick mason and you've been doing that all your life,
right?
Then one day they say, "Hey, come in. We got to have silica training," and you're looking like,
"What's silica?
What is that?" You know what I mean?
It hasn't really been talked about till 2016, right?
Absolutely. So that's very important.
Yep. And then also another important thing is that we got to keep the records of of the exposures that the workers were exposed to out there.
Mm-hmm.
And the medical exams. And all that. Also, the worker, the employee has to know about those records as well. So it's not like I can keep these records in a sealed vault where I'm holding my, Coca-Cola trademark recipe or something like that. It's got to be something that they know about as well.
Everybody knows how to make Coca-Cola, man.
Right.
Yeah. So, but that's I would say a brief overview of the requirements that are set out there now for the employer. But one thing that we probably need to spend a little bit more time in is actually the medical surveillance program itself.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about they got to provide medical exams. They got to be able. They have to provide the monitoring of the exposed workers and things of that nature as well. So Dylan, you talked about for the 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
That the exams has to be made available for every 3 years. But what's some of the other exams that it consists of?
So this medical surveillance program that these employees have to go through. So we talked about it's employees that have been have to wear a respirator 30 days or more out of a year, and then also anybody for the medical surveillance program, any worker that is exposed to silica above the action level is going to have to be in a medical surveillance program. So they're being, surveillanced for the next 3 years to make sure there's no change in their lung function. So some of the things they're going to do is they're going to get a medical history and a work history. So they're going to talk about Have you had past lung issues or breathing problems? What kind of work have you done in the past? What are you doing now? What kind of work do you plan on doing in the future? And then they proceed with a physical examination, so they kind of go over all that stuff. And then one of the more important parts of it is they do a chest x-ray. So they do a chest x-ray to determine if you have any type of buildup or any underlying issues. So are you even able to, basically like if you were wearing a respirator, are you even able to wear a respirator? Do you have enough lung function? Some of the other things they do, pulmonary function test, determining how well your lungs function, how well your breathing system works in your body. They're testing for tuberculosis, and then any other test that's deemed appropriate by the medical professional. So I know there was a lot of stuff right there, but those can all be found in the OSHA standard for both general industry and construction. It clearly lays out, hey, this is the medical surveillance program. These are the requirements of it.
Yeah. And so, we talked about some of the other tests that, that might be deemed appropriate. So when they're looking for the shortness of breath and stuff like that, so some of the factors that can take a play into this, so is smokers, who people have been smoking for, 15, 20 years or something like that, people who have COPD, history of asthma, bronchitis,
exactly.
just so all those things, will play a role or have a factor in all of this as well as you send your employee, or if you have to go as an individual, to get your chest x-rays and to be examined. So, if a licensed healthcare professional asks for additional tests or something like that, those are some of the things that they're going to be looking for as well. Because again, the one of the most common things when it comes to silica is that it is a respiratory, disease, infection,
right?
And so forth.
And like I said, they do a tuberculosis or a TB test. So tuberculosis is like a buildup of mucus in your is in your lungs, it's in some part of your respiratory system where you get a buildup of this mucus. And I know certain cultures are a lot more likely to have tuberculosis than others. So it's important that these employees are getting this TB test to know if they have it and if they can even work in a type of environment where their lung function is going to be compromised.
Yep.
Something else I wanted to mention is if you go to a place like Concentra or what word am I trying to think of here? Some type of medical facility. What's the worker friendly ones?
You're talking about a occupational?
Yeah, an occupational clinic. That's what, man, that was just escaping me. If you go to an occupational clinic and you tell them that you want a silica test or a silica surveillance, they know exactly what to do. Like they already have all the required paperwork. They're going. You don't have to know every specific thing. It's good to know it, but if you go to a place like an occupational clinic, they're gonna have all this stuff ready to rip for you.
Yeah. So don't go to the back alley with some guy that's gonna put a snorkeler on you and be like, hey, this is the fit test that you need.
Yeah.
That might not be the place to go. So actually the next thing that we're going to jump into is the actual, just some of what are the options that are out there. But for all you listeners, if you want to know what are the options out there, if you do have silica exposures on your job site, you're going to have to listen in to part 2, because we're going to actually turn this into a series, because we still got a lot to talk about. And so we're going to have to break this into 2 episodes here. So I know Dylan has y'all on the edge of y'all seat to hear these options that are coming up.
Yeah, guys, this is some riveting information.
Absolutely. So again, coming to you from the HardHat Studios in Alexandria, Virginia, we
peacing out.
All right,
guys, we'll see you next time.
So be sure to click on part 2 of this. That way you could hear everything else that Lieutenant Oates and Dylan Hipple has to say about silica. Thanks, guys.
All right.